Let me ask you, are a reverend. You've been called by God. You have degrees in ministry. Do you still sin as a son of God? Do you sin?
I have a fundamental belief as a Christian in particular, and I'm distinguishing my role in Christian ministry from those who are called to ministry in other communions and in interfaith ministries and other ministries, if you will. As a Christian, I have a fundamental belief that every single person who has walked this earth, with the exception of one, has sinned and will continue to sin and is only saved by the grace of God.
So
and I'm sure you can guess the one person I would omit from the category of sinner.
Are you a son of God?
Yes, absolutely.
And do you sin?
We all sin.
How about you?
Yes.
So as a son of God, you still sin. So those who are not sons of God, do they sin?
All human beings are subject to sin as a part of my theological framework.
So as a son of God, what's the purpose of becoming son of God if you're still going to sin? Because all who sin serve Satan.
As part of my fundamental theology and as part of my fundamental thinking as a Christian, I am so incredibly thankful for Jesus, as in God manifesting God's self in human form, and the punishment that Jesus suffered on Calvary's cross. Because as a result of that punishment that he suffered, the debt for me has been paid. So human beings are subject to sin and will continue to sin, but thank God for grace.
Does
and I
the
use
Bible
grace
say
as an
that
acronym.
as children of God, you would continue
let me finish
to sin?
this, because I think it speaks very profoundly to the question you raised. I think and I preach about grace as an acronym. GRACE, God's riches at Christ's expense. So I'm so grateful that at Christ's expense, when he was hung on Calvary's cross, I'm so grateful for the bloodshed there. Because of him, in my sinful nature, in all human beings' sinful nature, if we believe, thank goodness we have the gift of everlasting life.
So now that you've been born again of God, you still have Satan's nature?
Now that I have been born again, do I still have a sinful nature?
Do you have Satan's nature? Because as a person who was not born of God, you had the nature of Satan, which is of sin. And that's why Christ came, so that you may overcome that. So as a son of God, you still have Satan's nature? Are you saying that?
I would not phrase the premise that way at all. I would. You're approaching a question from a very different framework that I would. My thinking is not in that ballpark. My thinking is that all human beings are subject to sin. There is a doctrine called original sin, or some call it ancestral sin, which speaks to all human beings being descendants, if you will, of Adam or Adame, as in the first man, the first human to walk earth, who engaged in a sinful act. And because of that sinful act, all human beings subsequently born will, not may, not might, not if, will engage in sin. And the sin caused a chasm or a separation from God's grace and God's perfect goodness. So Jesus came to close that. So as a result, human beings will still sin. It's inevitable. We all will make mistakes. We all will fall from grace. But thank goodness for Jesus's perfect love and Jesus's sacrifice.
So let me just say, we got to kind of cut it short, a little bit, instead of a preacher sermon. So you are saying,
you got my juices flowing with a deep question. You got my juices flowing with a deep question.
I understand that too. So Reverend Augustine, you're saying, yes, Jesse, as a born-again son of God, I still have Satan's nature. That's what you're saying.
That's not at all what I'm saying.
Do you have Satan's sinful nature?
I'm saying that as a called-out Christian, I am so thankful to
I know
Jesus
you said all that, but what I'm asking,
shed.
just for the record, are you saying that as a born-again Christian, you do have Satan's sinful nature, or you don't have it?
I'm saying all human beings.
No, we're talking about you.
Included,
do you still have Satan's sinful nature as a son of God?
I never professed to have Satan's nature in the first place. I am made in the image of God. So there's nothing about me that is Satan or satanic in nature in the first place.
As a son of Satan, you was a sinner, right?
All human beings inevitably will sin.
And so as a son of God, you still have Satan's nature, and that's why you sin?
So that's not, again, that's not at all my fundamental thinking. I wanted to unpack for you and kind of compress all those years of school that you talked about. I was trying to compress that into 30 seconds or maybe a minute. I wasn't that good at it. It's so deep, it's so rich. So you got to forgive me for that. But I would fundamentally disagree with the premise that your question is based upon.
So if you still sin as a son of God, what's the difference between someone who believes in God and someone who does not believe in God?
Let me ask you this. Do you sin?
No,
You don't sin.
no.
Wow.
Because once you
So
are born again of God, you cannot sin. And if anyone says that he has been born again of God and he still sin, he is a liar. The truth is not in him. For that reason, Christ came that you may not sin. You overcome sin because sin is of the nature of Satan. But I
so
want to ask you, what's the
I can
difference
firmly
between...
remember I can firmly remember many of commercials with Billy Graham professing his sinful nature as a human and thanking God for Jesus. I can remember many of the other right-wing evangelicals who made the same profession and thank God for Jesus because of human beings' sinful nature. So it's amazing that you say you do not sin. That's a different category. That's a very different category.
What's the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian if the Christians are still sinning? What's the difference?
So the question I must ask you then is, what is your definition of sin?
No, I'm going to ask you that in a minute, but you didn't answer that question yet. I asked twice.
But it's important. In order to answer the question, it's got to be based on a premise,
For
right?
you being a reverend with a degree in it, what's the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian if you're still sinning just like the non-Christian? What's the difference?
So to be identified as a Christian, and there are many different layers of Christianity, many different denominations under the broad umbrella of Christianity, but to identify as a Christian, one must have a fundamental belief in Jesus the Christ. That is a definition of being a Christian. Again, there are many layers within that. As part of my layering, I believe human beings across the board are sinful, inevitably, not might, but will sin. But thank God for God's grace, because of Jesus, human beings are forgiven of their sins.
So you
We try to do better. We want to do better. And inevitably we will do better. But thank God, because we are human and because we are not divine, we will fall from grace. And thank God for God's forgiveness.
Are you saying you serve Satan and God as a Christian?
I do not serve Satan. I have no idea where that statement came from. I have no idea where that came from.
Well, when you say you're sinning, all who sin are serving Satan.
So it depends on your premise and your fundamental definition of what a sin is.
What is sin? What type of sin do you commit? What is sin?
What type of sin? So you don't commit any sins. Let me ask you this. Is it possible for someone to unintentionally sin, or does it always have to be a deliberate act?
Once you're born again of God, it's impossible to sin.
I have a fundamental disagreement with that theology.
What type of sin do you commit?
I will respect your perspective. Again, there's no reason to be disagreeable simply because you disagree. I will respect your position, but I must tell you, I fundamentally disagree with that theology.
But my position is right. It's correct. Yours is wrong.
Okay. And that's fine as long as that's in your mind's eye. That's absolutely fine.
What type of sin?
Absolutely fine.
What type of sin do you commit?
So I think all human beings sin. So I don't think there's anything that's above the fray. I mean, I think there are different levels and different. I think all human beings will inevitably do something that's wrong.
So what type do you commit?
Anything that is not consistent with the perfect, absolute space, holiness of God. Anything that falls short of that, whether it's a personal desire for attention, whether it is a personal desire for affection, whatever the case may be, when you have the least bit of deviance from the perfect state of God, I think you have fallen into a space of sin.
What type of sin do you commit?
Stealing. It need not be killing. Sin is such a unintentional thing. All human beings, as part of my theology, will sin.
What
there are
type
different
of
layers
sin
of
do
sin,
you commit as
but
a Christian?
thank goodness for forgiveness through Jesus.
What type of sin do you commit as a Christian?
I don't know that I would phrase the question like that. What type of sins do I commit as a Christian? Because your
what type of
question
sin are you
presupposes,
committing?
but your question presupposes that because I'm a Christian, I'm committing some sort of sins.
You
And what I'm
said that
saying
you
is
still
that,
sin. What type of sin do you commit?
what type of sins do you commit?
I don't. So what type do you commit?
I think because I'm human, I'm subject to fail. I'm subject to fault inevitably. I think all human beings are subject to do something wrong.
As a sinner,
All human beings are subject to do something where inevitably you'll stop and say, I wish I hadn't done that.
so what type of sin are you committing?
Maybe today I was on the copy machine and I was so caught up in doing something because I was so strong-willed and focused and I was making a copy and trying to scan and I didn't want my assistant to stop and somebody passed by and spoke and I waved rather than stopping to speak. I should have affirmed that person was speaking for a reason. That person may have been weak. That person may have been looking for some sort of affection and they were looking to me as the pastor, as their pastor, but I was so focused on something else that I made a mistake.
And that was a sin?
That was falling short of God's perfect state.
Was that
So
a sin?
for that mistake I made, some theologically may call that a sin for falling short of the perfect place of God. And something as innocuous as that I just described, I am so thankful that I am forgiven. Once I own it, once I say I'm sorry, God is done with it.
And so you
But
call
all
that
human beings will do something for which they've got to say they're sorry.
So you call that a sin?
I call that something for which I'm sorry, and I recognize some theologies may
But what
drill
I'm trying to
deeper
find
and
out,
call
are
it
you
sin.
calling that a sin?
Well, it's not, I don't know, forgive me. I can't think in just those simplistic terms. What I'm sharing with you is that that's something I did that I wish I had a do-over. As I think about it, it was a space that separated me from God's perfect state. Because if I was perfect, if I didn't sin, I would have been able to realize this person was speaking to me at that time because they needed the affection of their pastor. It's COVID-19. There's so much going on out here, and I'm so caught up on something else, I should have stopped. So if that was a sin, perhaps it was because I was too ambitious in doing something else and I was caught on self and not looking at someone else.
That's
So it's
amazing.
possible some theologies would categorize that as a sin.
That is
It's something
amazing.
for which, however,
so
I
are
am
you
forgiven.
saying, give me a quick yes or no, are you saying that was a sin when you did that today?
I can't give you a quick yes or no on that because it's too multi-layered when you talk about concepts like sin.
But
It's
you
too
gave me an
multi-layered.
example of how you sinned. So are you saying, yes, that was a sin when you did that?
I'm saying that was a space of separation where I was not in communion with the absolute perfect
I know you said all that, but I'm
God.
asking you, was that a sin?
I don't know. I can only tell you that's something for which I'm sorry.